welcome to the Ruth Macfit Podcast. I am very happy to be here with you today. I've been inspired to record this episode because of something that happened to me at the weekend that I thought that other people might be experiencing. So on Saturday, I was going out for my normal run. I was going on a brunch run. If you follow me on Instagram, you might have seen me talking about it. And what normally happens on these runs is that I don't always feel like going out, but once I start running, my energy picks up. I start to feel good, but I didn't on this day. It just felt like my energy was getting worse the more I tried to run. So I allowed myself to stop running. I didn't really know what was wrong, but I did decide that I was going to stop running. To begin with, it was going to be a run walk. And then when that was still hard, I decided to walk. And then eventually I actually phoned my husband and said, come in early, pick me up on the way in. And this might sound small to you. It might not seem like a big deal. Somebody goes for a run, they decide to walk. But for me, this is a big deal because the old me absolutely would not have done that. Years ago, when I was 32, I started to feel unwell and I decided to follow the advice that you see of if it's above the neck, then you can crack on. If it's below your neck, then you probably should rest. And at the time, I had this sore throat. I didn't feel great. The throat was really sore, but it wasn't in my chest. So I told myself that I was fine. I was just looking for excuses and I should just head out anyway. So I continued running. They felt really, really hard, but I pushed through anyway. And my throat got so sore that I went to the doctors about it, feeling really silly, if I'm honest. I remember that very clearly. And I was told it was just acute laryngitis, gargle rasping, bish bash bosh. Anyway, long story short, a couple of weeks later, I developed this horrendous joint pain that was kind of moving around my body. That carried on for a bit. And I ended up going into the hospital and I was diagnosed with something called rheumatic fever, which is an autoimmune response to strep throat. And yeah, antibiotics would have helped this. But I do think that the autoimmune condition came because I didn't listen to my body. I didn't rest. And recovery after this was long. So when I went out for that run on Saturday and I got up in the morning and I got ready to go out and I headed out the door in not very nice weather, I was able to tell myself that isn't the actions of someone who lacks motivation or is lazy. And that clearly my body was telling me something. And then when even running downhill got hard, I knew that it was time to stop. And I listened and I walked. Lo and behold, the next day, I felt really quite poorly. I was probably under the weather. And on Sunday evening, I didn't even eat my dinner, which is unheard of for me. And it's not turned into a full cold. I still don't feel 100%, but it's not turned into a full cold. And I do think that resting had a lot to do with it not getting worse. So in this episode today, I want to look at what the science actually says about exercising when you've got a bug, when doing a bit might be fine, and when rest is really going to matter. And also whether missing exercise while you recover is going to affect your long-term fitness. And then what can happen when we push through when maybe, just maybe, we shouldn't. But before I go into the science of this, I want to just stop here for a moment and talk about why this situation arises. And it is something I see fairly often, especially for people who genuinely care about their health, because I think it's rarely that they're making mistakes or being reckless. I think most of the time it comes from really good intentions. If you're somebody who really values movement, who's worked hard to build this consistency, who finally feels like exercise is part of your life rather than something you feel that you have to do or you're constantly starting over, the idea of stopping can feel quite uncomfortable. There's a real sense of if I don't go today, I'm going to lose that momentum. Or if I rest now, I'm not going to get back into it again. And then on top of this, we're surrounded by these very simple rules, those really sticky phrases that, stay with us. And the above the neck rule is a very good example of this. It's very easy to remember. It gives you that definitive yes or no. And in theory, it's trying to stop people training when they've got proper bugs. But the problem with simple rules like this is that they don't take into account the context. They don't ask how tired you are, how stressed you've been, how well you've been sleeping, or whether this illness is on top of an already very full plate. And I know that was the case for me. And they definitely don't help people who aren't very good at tuning into those early signals. So if, like I was, you tend to override that discomfort, ignore your fatigue, or pride yourself on pushing through, those rules can actually give you permission to do exactly that. You don't feel awful. You're not in bed with a fever. So you tell yourself you should be able to cope. And then when exercise feels harder than it normally would, you don't see this as information or feedback to take a break. You see it as this personal failing. Well, that's what I would have done anyway. It's that voice that kicks in telling you you're lazy, that you're making excuses, you just need to try harder. And I think this is really common with women at this stage of life who've got busy jobs, busy families, life admin, everyone else's needs. And then when their body starts whispering instead of shouting, they just put it to the side. There's also something else going on here, especially if you've been in that on or off cycle with exercise. And if you're just starting out with it, because at that point, fitness can feel really quite fragile and rest can feel quite risky. And this isn't because a walk or week off is going to be dangerous, but because it feels like you're stepping away from that control. There's this fear that if you stop, everything is going to unravel. But what's actually happening here, and this is something I really want you to remember, is that your body isn't asking for inactivity forever. It's just asking for a little bit of space to recover from this added stress, because exercise is a stress, a good stress, but it's stress. Life, admin and things going on can be stressful, and your body isn't going to separate them out. It's not going to put them into different pots. It becomes a total load. And when that gets too high, it's going to start sending signals. Sometimes they're loud and sometimes they're subtle. And the hardest bit, I think, is that those early signals don't always feel dramatic. It's things like having heavier legs, lower energy, a workout just isn't feeling quite right. And those are the ones that we're most likely to ignore. But before we go on, I want you to stop a moment and notice to see if you have this tendency in yourself, not because I want you to be annoyed with yourself about it. If your instinct is always to push, to override, to prove you can cope, then I want you to know that this episode isn't about taking that away from you. It's about helping you make decisions that are going to support your long-term health. That's what I needed. And that's what I want to talk to you about today. Right. Let's talk about what the science is actually saying here, because this is where things can often get oversimplified. There isn't just one single rule that is going to fit everyone. And what research tends to give us are these patterns and principles, not this neat set of instructions to follow no matter the context. So you'll often hear that above the neck guideline. I'm going to call it a guideline, not a rule, because that's what it is. And this does come from medical advice. So organizations like Mayo Clinic and Harvard Health talk about this exact pattern. So the idea is that with mild symptoms like a runny nose, a bit of nasal congestion, or a slightly sore throat, then gentle movement is usually fine. Light exercise doesn't tend to make things worse. And for some people, it can actually help them feel better. But the really important part of that advice that often gets missed by people like me is the intensity. So those same organizations are very clear that once exercise becomes harder or more demanding, the risk to reward ratio is going to change. So what might be helpful or neutral at a low level can become unhelpful once you start stressing your system. And this does make sense. When we train, especially for those longer durations or higher intensity, we are creating a stress response in the body. Stress hormones are going to rise, and this is normal. It's part of the adaptation. But when that training stress is going to then sit on top of illness, our immune system is already working pretty hard. Those harder or more prolonged training sessions, when we're ill, can temporarily suppress parts of the immune response, which we don't want to happen. And that doesn't usually look dramatic. It looks like slower recovery, lingering symptoms, feeling like you just can't shift something that should have passed by now. And there is also an important difference to chat about here between normal exercise fatigue and then illness-related fatigue, because it is different. It's like I talked about on my run on Saturday, and this is supported by the research as well. Normal fatigue tends to improve as you warm up. You might feel stiff, sluggish, not that motivated, but then as you start, your breathing starts to settle, your body finds its rhythm, and then things become more manageable. But fatigue linked to illness often does the opposite. Things feel heavier as the time goes on, effort increases rather than decreases, and energy tends to drop instead of building. And this isn't a lack of fitness, it's your body at work, it's the physiology. And it's not that you shouldn't exercise when you're unwell, but it does strongly suggest that the intensity here matters. Recovery matters. How your body responds at the time is information you should absolutely listen to. Resting when you're ill doesn't undo your training or weaken your immune system. In fact, appropriate rest is going to support that recovery and reduce the likelihood of those symptoms dragging on and training being harder for longer. And I think the mistake we make is that we assume that because something is technically allowed, it's automatically helpful. So just because you can do a session doesn't mean that you should do it, or that you should do it in the same way as you normally would. And that's where we need this flexibility to come in, adapting what you do based on how your body is responding. And this isn't a lack of discipline. I would argue that this is more disciplined. It's understanding how your body actually works. So now let's talk about how this actually looks in our real life, because I think most of the time the question isn't, what does the guidance say? I'm going to just get my medical handbook out now. It's, what do I do this morning? Should I do that workout or not? And the first thing I'd say is that you don't usually need to start with a full workout to test and see if you're okay. Your body is going to give you information much earlier than that, through some very ordinary movements, things like walking up and down the stairs, carrying laundry around, bending down, standing up from the sofa. On a normal day, these things can barely register to us. But if they're suddenly feeling pretty hard, you're feeling pretty weak, you're feeling breathless, or they're disproportionate in effort, then this is a signal that is worth paying attention to. And this is definitely where I went wrong in the past. I took that below the neck guideline to mean chest symptoms only, a cough, tightness in your chest, something going on in my lungs. And what I completely missed was that deep fatigue, that whole body response, the aches, the heaviness, and that flat and drained feeling. They are also below the neck symptoms. They're systemic. They involve the whole body, not just one area. So now, instead of asking, where are my symptoms? I'm asking, how is my body responding when I move? And I still occasionally probably push through for longer than I should, or start a workout when I probably shouldn't have in the first place. But what I find is a really, really practical way to test out if you're ready to go back to the gym or do your full workout is with some movement at home. We have pajama workouts in the No Crap Cake Method app, and these are a great place to start, especially if you're returning from illness as well. And this might be popping the kettle on to boil in the morning and just seeing how some worktop press-ups feel, or a few squats feel, or a short mobility routine. They don't necessarily need to feel like hard training. It's just that we can do those movements. And if they feel normal, maybe you're a bit stiff, but it's manageable, this is really useful information. But if they feel unusually hard or draining or heavier the longer that you do them, then this is also useful information. And it usually means that your body isn't quite ready for the next full session yet. And from there, it's about adapting and adjusting rather than forcing a yes/no decision. So on days when symptoms are mild and movement feels okay, that might mean choosing a lighter version of your usual workout, a slower pace, lower intensity, shorter duration, less weight. And on days where even gentle movement starts to feel like hard work, it might mean skipping formal exercise altogether and just keeping to a normal daily movement as you can. I mean, some days you just know that you're not meant to be exercising. This is for those days in between. But if you start your session, you think, oh, I think I'm okay. And you start your session and then you're working into it and you realize you're starting to feel worse rather than better, then it is okay to stop and change your plan. Turning a run into a walk or a workout into a stretch isn't failure. It's just you responding to the feedback that you're being given. And I mentioned that coming back from illness is exactly the same. Start smaller than you think you need to, not because you're weak, but because your system is still recalibrating. So shorter sessions, easier effort, paying attention to how you feel later that day or the next morning. The aim of this part of your training isn't about progression. Once your body shows that you can handle more, then you can build it back up again. And this approach is going to take a bit more awareness than, is it below the neck or above the neck? But you're likely to have better outcomes over time because you're not constantly pushing or constantly stopping. You're just adjusting based on what you have the capacity to do. But if, like me, you don't want to get ill in the first place, then I think we should talk about prevention, because as soon as winter hits, the internet is going to fill up with boost your immune system hacks and never get sick again. And I wish I could tell you that there was a magic supplement or a special drink that would mean that you can sail through this cold and flu season completely untouched. But alas, there is not. But what we do have is a mix of solid and slightly boring fundamentals and a few things that might help, but are not going to be miracle cures. So the basics are not glamorous, but they do matter. So getting enough sleep, eating enough food, including a decent amount of protein, fruit and veg, managing stress where you can, moving regularly when you're well enough at a level your body can actually recover from is going to be key here. And you'll notice that these things are all about reducing the stress on your system. This is going to support your immune system in the background. And it doesn't mean that you're going to be invincible, but it does help your body respond better when you do get a bug. And then on top of that, there are some very, I guess, unsexy, but very effective things like hand washing, not sharing your drinks with your snotty kids, keeping your rooms ventilated, which is hard here in this time of year, and then staying home when you're poorly so you're not spreading it around. And then there are the things that you'll often ask about, things like vitamin C. The research here is a bit interesting. So regular vitamin C seems to slightly shorten the duration of colds, but it's not going to stop you from catching them in the first place. And the effect is quite small, roughly a 10% reduction in duration. Zinc is similar. Some studies and reviews suggest that taking zinc lozenges on the first day of symptoms may shorten a cold by a day or two in some people, but it doesn't seem to be effective for prevention, and higher doses can cause other side effects like nausea or taste changes. And then there's the herbal remedies. The one that I hear most often is about echinacea, and that has been studied a lot, with some trials suggesting a small benefit in reducing the duration or severity of a cold, but other studies show very little effect. But overall, the evidence is mixed on all of these, and it's not strong enough to say that they're reliable to shield you against colds. And then we also have things like ginger, lemon, honey, hot toddies. And these are going to sit more in the comfort and symptom relief camp. A hot drink can soothe a sore throat. Steam can help you feel less congested. Honey can help ease a cough. And they make you feel better while your body is doing the actual work it needs to do. They're not preventing viruses from arriving, and they're not going to shorten it, but they're going to make you feel better. So one thing that does come up often about winter health, and especially if you live in the Northern Hemisphere, like the UK, is going to be vitamin D. And this is even more important when you're perimenopausal, menopausal, because we tend to absorb less vitamin D at this stage of life, and we are more likely to be vitamin D deficient. In the UK, we do not, unfortunately, get a lot of sunshine in these darker months. And vitamin D is very important for our immune function as well as our bone health. And most people are advised to consider supplementing this in autumn and winter, especially if you're indoors a lot or if you have darker skin, which makes it harder to produce vitamin D. And I always supplement my vitamin D in the wintertime because I think it's quite easy to become deficient. And even in our summers, I'm not sure that we're always getting the sunlight we need. And of course, we also have vaccination, things like the flu jabs that are out there. And these are probably some of the most effective tools in reducing the risk of serious illness, especially if you have underlying health conditions or you're around people that do. And if you do have those underlying conditions, you're normally offered this for free on the NHS as well. But you need to talk to your doctor about that. But the main thing is that if we simplify all of that, prevention is less about finding the perfect supplement and more about looking after those basics consistently, and then considering things like vitamin D in the winter if that feels right for you. And then you could try vitamin C and see if it helps as a nice to have, but not an absolute necessity. And then on top of that, it's going to be practicing those boring but effective things like our hygiene and having that flexible approach to our training instead of trying to stick to a plan no matter what. And accept that winter is probably going to include some bugs, especially if you have children like I do that come home from school and share them with you. Do you also want to touch on what can actually go wrong if we ignore all of this and just keep on pushing through? And it's not to scare you, but just to give you some context. Obviously, I push through, but most of the time, the consequence of training through illness is pretty simple. You feel iller for longer than you needed to. Your energy stays low, your sessions feel flat, you end up taking more total time out than if you just backed off for a few days. And that alone is frustrating enough. But there are also some less obvious risks when you push hard through those systemic symptoms like fever, deep aches, chesty coughs, or that real exhaustion. And the guidance is quite clear here. So when a virus is affecting the whole body, exercise, especially intense exercise, is not recommended. There is a concern about things like inflammation around the heart with some viral infections, along with the risk of complications in general if you're stressing the system when it's already under a lot of strain. And that doesn't mean that every session that you do with a cold is dangerous. It just means that when your body is giving you strong whole body signals, that is not the time to power on through. Pushing on can also add the stress load that we talked about earlier. If our immune system is already working hard and then we add to that intense training, poor sleep, high life stress on top of it, something eventually is going to give. And that might be like getting a secondary infection, picking up injuries because you're moving with poor coordination, or just feeling wiped out and demoralized for weeks. And in my case, continuing to stress my body when it was already struggling contributed to an autoimmune response that really did change my life for a long time. This is a rare thing to happen, but it is a real example of what can happen when you repeatedly override those serious signals. I think more commonly what I would see is that people feel unwell, they push through, they never fully recover. So then training stays half-hearted, they get frustrated, feel like their body is letting them down, they lose confidence and motivation, which then has its own knock-on effects. So none of this is about willpower. It's about not giving the system enough space to do its job properly. So if you are someone who always takes the tough it out option, consider that sometimes the stronger and braver choice is to step back, not step up. So I want to finish this podcast episode by just zooming out a little bit, because I think this is the bit that really helps it all come together. Whenever you're deciding whether you're going to train, it's worth asking yourself what the outcome of the session is meant to be. If this is a session where the goal is to progress, to get stronger, to push your pace, to add load, or to challenge yourself, or is this a session that lives in a different part of your training block, where the focus shifts slightly? There are going to be times in training where our goal really is progression, when pushing a bit more makes total sense and is supported by the rest of your life and your recovery, of course. And there are also times where the goal is just going to be maintaining or simply just staying connected to the habit without asking your body for anything extra. Being unwell, run down, or coming out of the other side of a bug is usually not the moment for that progression. And this doesn't mean that training is pointless. It just means the purpose of the training has changed. Maybe this part of your block is about listening, preserving energy, and supporting recovery. And then the next block can be about pushing forward again. And when you look at it like this, resting or adjusting doesn't feel like giving up. It feels like making a decision that is going to serve the bigger picture, the grand scheme of things. And my Saturday run was a very good example of this for me. If I pushed on, the outcome wouldn't have been fitness gains. It would have been more stress on a body that was already under pressure. So by stopping, the outcome I got was quicker recovery and being able to get back to doing what I love and I'm feeling good rather than dragging myself through it. And I think we see this often with people who have got races coming up. They're following a training program and they feel like missing a session is going to set them back. But this does happen. It's annoying, but you're far better to recover and then be able to push forward properly again. And I want to make sure that you understand this episode isn't about rules. It's not about having any guilt. It's not about proving anything to anyone. It's about recognizing that training phases change, capacity is going to change. And the smartest thing that we can do sometimes is accept that this session or this week has a different job to do. You're not losing strength by listening, you're protecting it. And when you do come back to the block where progression is going to happen again, you're far more likely to be able to meet it with energy rather than exhaustion. And you don't have to earn rest by breaking down. You're allowed to choose it earlier. And in the long run, that is what's going to keep you training and not stop you. Now, if this episode has resonated with you, I would absolutely love it if you could let me know, leave a comment, subscribe, to the podcast and share with a friend. You can find me on Instagram at Ruth Macfit. I would love to hear from you, and I'm happy to answer any questions you might have there. And if you're interested on hearing more about the coaching options at the No Crap Cake method, then you can head to my website, www.ruthmacfit.com. Until next time, goodbye.